She folded their laundry, cooked every meal. Then at brunch, her daughter-in-law laughed. "She's just the help. Daniel's mom lives somewhere else." Eleanor froze, tray in hand, in her own house. That night, she pulled out the deed, with her name on it. "They gave me the couch," she whispered. "I'll leave them the floor." All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. I opened the door for her guests, and she told them I worked there. She called me the maid, in front of everyone, and they believed her. The front door swung open to the sound of laughter and the sharp clink of champagne flutes. It was Sunday brunch in the upscale suburban estate that Eleanor had helped build. Every tile, every archway, every scent. The house shimmered with curated comfort, white orchids on the entry table, soft jazz floating from hidden speakers, the smell of cinnamon scones and crisp linens in the air. Eleanor stood poised at the threshold, the sunlight catching the edge of her silver hair, a tray balanced in her hands with effortless grace. On it sat freshly baked quiche, sliced melon, and glasses of infused water. Her beige blouse was crisp, sleeves rolled with precision. Not an apron in sight, but still invisible. Caroline swept past her in a swirl of expensive perfume and silk. Her laugh rang too loud, her heels clicking too fast. She ushered her trio of friends inside, women with lacquered nails, oversized sunglasses, and husbands who liked golf more than small talk. "Oh, don't mind her," Caroline said with a wave of her manicured hand, flashing a glossy smile at her guests. "She just helps around the house." Eleanor's foot froze mid-step. The tray tilted ever so slightly. One of the women gave a polite nod. Another smiled vaguely, like they'd just been told the Wi-Fi password. No one questioned it. No one blinked. They turned back to their conversation about Tuscany, or truffle oil, or something equally disposable. Across the room, Daniel stood near the mimosa bar. Her son. Her only child. He glanced up. Saw her standing there. Saw the pause, the pain, the lie. He sipped his drink. Didn't say a word. Eleanor's lips twitched into a soft smile. Controlled. Measured. She nodded graciously, set the tray on the marble kitchen island, and excused herself with the kind of elegance that made people assume she was fine. She walked slowly up the stairs, her hand trailing the dark mahogany railing she'd once chosen with her husband. The house had echoes now, not just of sound, but of memory. Paintings she hadn't approved, carpets she hadn't picked, a life rearranged to exclude the woman who had made it possible. Her room, if one could still call it that, was the smallest in the house. A utility guest suite, Caroline had once said dismissively, near the laundry. No view, no warmth, just a narrow bed, a muted lamp, and a dresser that groaned when you opened the drawer too fast. She sat at the edge of the mattress, her hands folding neatly in her lap, and then she bent down. There, beneath the bed frame, nestled behind old suitcases and forgotten shoeboxes, was a small cedar chest with a tarnished latch. She pulled it out gently, like touching something sacred. The lock clicked open with a whisper. Inside, resting beneath faded photographs and yellowed documents, was a single blue folder. The label, in her late husband's handwriting, was unmistakable. Deed, 2001. She hadn't touched it in years, not since the day she agreed, naively, lovingly, to let the paperwork be easier when Daniel married Caroline. She hadn't wanted to be in the way. She'd thought love would be enough. Eleanor traced the edge of the folder with her finger. Outside, the laughter continued. Caroline's voice rose above the rest, something about Pilates and Paris. She stood slowly, walking to the tiny desk by the window. She opened her old leather-bound planner, flipped past birthdays no one remembered anymore, and found the number scribbled in the back cover. She dialed. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. "Jameson and Hall, Real Estate Division." Eleanor's voice didn't shake. "This is Eleanor Hartley. I want the deed updated." A pause. Click of keys. "Ma'am, do you have—" "I have the original contract. I'm the legal owner. I just want the papers transferred back to my name." Quietly. The woman on the other end softened. Understood, Mrs. Hartley. We'll begin the process immediately. Eleanor ended the call and set the receiver down gently. Then she reached for her tea. Took a slow sip. Outside, someone clinked a fork against a glass. Caroline's voice sang again, "To family!" Eleanor didn't smile this time. She whispered to herself, "Not anymore." Eleanor closes the folder slowly, sets it on the desk beside a silver pen, and stares out the window, expression unreadable. The laughter downstairs fades to a dull hum. In her lap, the deed rests like a sleeping storm, and the first crack in the bay glass has just begun to spread. They gave me a room smaller than the walk-in closet I built. The fluorescent laundry light flickered as Eleanor stepped out of her bedroom, a hallway utility room they'd dressed up with a curtain rod and a wall hook and dared to call a guest suite. The smell of dryer sheets clung to the walls. Every time the washer spun, the vibrations rattled the fragile picture frame on her nightstand. The room used to be a storage nook. Now it was hers. She stood barefoot on the cold tile, staring toward the other end of the hall where the master bedroom door sat wide open like a smirking mouth. Inside, laughter echoed. Caroline's voice sweetened with self-importance. "I swear the lighting in here is better than any studio." Eleanor moved silently closer, drawn like a moth to the memory of what was once hers. The walls were now eggshell white with soft gray undertones. A full-length mirror leaned against the wall, angled for selfies. Glass shelves lined one side of the room, holding perfume bottles, handbags, and rings that sparkled under designer sconces. An oversized velvet ottoman sat beneath a gold chandelier that didn't belong in a bedroom, but matched the vanity lights perfectly. Her old master suite had become a glam room. And not just any room. The walk-in closet Eleanor had once designed with a contractor for her late husband's shoes and her Sunday dresses was now stacked with labeled bins: hair, skin, makeup, shoot outfits. Eleanor's throat tightened. She turned back to her own room, stepping inside with the weight of memory pressing her down. Her bed creaked as she sat on the edge, the quilt tucked neatly, corners folded with the discipline of a woman who knew the value of order. Her hand drifted to the bedside drawer. She pulled it open and removed a small envelope, the receipt for the down payment. 70% of the house's cost, paid from her savings. The money she'd tucked away after her husband passed, intending to travel, maybe finally start painting again. But Daniel had asked, "Just to get us started, Mom. You'll always have your space here." Her space now sat between the laundry and the linen closet. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Caroline leaned into the doorway, arms folded, wearing a silk robe with the initials CMC stitched in gold. "Hey, I didn't want to interrupt, but I was thinking..." She glanced at the single window, which didn't open fully. "You might want to look into a senior-friendly apartment, something with better airflow and less hallway noise. This setup can't be great for you." Eleanor's eyes rose slowly. Caroline continued, tone dripping with performative concern. "I mean, it's just a thought. You've been so generous with your time around here. You deserve comfort." She smiled. Not kindly, but like someone closing a door with polite force. "I'll think about it," Eleanor said softly. Caroline nodded once and vanished, her perfume lingering longer than her sincerity. Eleanor picked up her phone. The number she'd called yesterday still glowed in her recent history. She tapped it. The same woman answered. "Jameson and Hall." Eleanor kept her voice level. "You mentioned the paperwork." "Yes, Mrs. Hartley. I looked into it personally this morning. The transfer was never finalized. The title, legally, it's still yours." Silence. Then Eleanor whispered, "Thank you." She ended the call. In the background, the washer beeped, the hallway filled with the faint scent of fabric softener. But Eleanor no longer noticed the noise. She was hearing something else now. Something louder than the spin cycle or Caroline's casual cruelty. It was the sound of control returning, one whisper at a time. Eleanor stood and faced the mirror hung behind the door. Her reflection didn't smile, but her eyes? They finally stopped looking tired, and somewhere in her heart, a plan that had once been a flicker was catching flame. They fed 10 guests and forgot the woman who cooked. The kitchen smelled of rosemary, roasted garlic, and lemon zest. Steam curled from the edges of a bubbling casserole dish, and the oven ticked softly as it cooled down. Eleanor stood by the stove, wiping her hands on a linen towel that was beginning to fray at the corners. Her apron, once white, now bore the badges of battle, splashes of red wine reduction, and the faint amber stain of curry. She had been on her feet for 5 hours. Chicken roasted to golden perfection, a vegan chickpea stew for Caroline's health-conscious friend, fresh rolls baked from scratch, her famous scalloped potatoes layered just right, every plate arranged with the precision of someone who understood the language of food, love, folded into layers. The house buzzed behind her. The dining room was full, relatives, neighbors, Caroline's work colleagues, all raising glasses and tossing their laughter like confetti. But not once had anyone stepped into the kitchen to say thank you. Eleanor removed her apron and smoothed her blouse. She walked to the archway between the kitchen and dining room, just enough to be in sight, just enough to be forgotten again. Caroline, radiant in a champagne-colored dress, held a glass of rosé as she posed for a photo beside the centerpiece Eleanor had arranged. "Oh, it was nothing," she said with a bashful laugh. "I just threw this all together." Eleanor said nothing. A guest, a woman with pearl earrings and a voice like brittle paper, smiled. "This is divine, Caroline. Your roast chicken is incredible." Caroline didn't miss a beat. "Thank you. But I had help. Eleanor's great in the kitchen." There it was again. Help. As if she were a spatula, as if years of hosting dinners, of handwritten recipe cards stained with the fingerprints of memory, were nothing more than convenience. Eleanor caught Daniel's eye across the table. He looked down, kept eating. She turned without a word. Back in the kitchen, the serving platters were picked clean. A single drumstick remained, 2 spoonfuls of potatoes, half a roll. No one had saved her a plate. The dining room rang with clinks of cutlery and full-throated stories. Eleanor gathered the scraps in silence, plating the last bits into a bowl and covering it with foil. She placed it in the fridge. Not because she was hungry, but because throwing it out would have made the indignity feel complete. Later, long after the wine had flowed and laughter had spilled into yawns and goodbyes, she washed the final dish. The sponge made a soft, wet squeak against porcelain. She walked to her room. No one called after her. No one noticed. Inside, the hallway hummed faintly with the sound of the dryer turning. Eleanor set the cold bowl on her desk and sat on the edge of her bed, posture straight, feet not quite touching the floor. The house around her exhaled contentment. But inside her, something shifted. She reached for her phone. Dialed. A man's voice answered on the 3rd ring. "Good evening. Macon Storage Services." "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "This is Eleanor Hartley. I'd like to schedule a delivery." "Of what, ma'am?" "One locked crate. From Unit 21B. Understood. Date of delivery?" She looked at her calendar. "Tomorrow." A pause on the line. "Do you need help unpacking?" "No," she said. "I just need it here. I'll handle the rest." She ended the call and looked at her reflection in the small mirror hung over her dresser. Her shoulders were square, her face unreadable. That crate hadn't seen daylight in over a decade. Inside it wasn't clutter. Inside it was evidence, and history, and leverage. Tomorrow the house would hold something more dangerous than her silence. It would hold her memory, and she was done letting them forget it. Some boxes carry linens. This one carried truth. The delivery man wheeled the crate into the foyer just after 10 a.m. A weathered metal trunk on rusted casters, edges dented by time and travel. It looked wildly out of place against the white marble floor and Caroline's tastefully minimalist decor. The man wiped his forehead, handed Eleanor the clipboard, and offered a polite nod. She signed without a word. The thud of the crate echoed as they set it down just outside the laundry hall. A puff of aged dust rose into the sunlight like breath from the past. Caroline appeared at the top of the staircase, already in gym leggings and a peach crop hoodie, smoothie in hand. "What is that?" she asked, nose wrinkling like the word itself was offensive. "Storage delivery," Eleanor replied, her tone neutral. Caroline came halfway down the stairs, arms folded. "It's huge. Why is it even here?" It's mine. You didn't mention this, Caroline said with a tight laugh. I just got the hall waxed. Eleanor bent slightly and ran her hand across the lid, fingers finding the familiar brass latch. It's staying in my room, she said. Caroline blinked. It's clutter. Eleanor's eyes met hers, cool and unwavering. Number its history. That ended the conversation. Later, behind the closed door of her guest room, Eleanor knelt beside the crate. The air around it felt colder, like it had carried winter in its bones. The key hung on a thin silver chain around her neck. She slipped it into the lock and twisted. It clicked open, quiet and final. She lifted the lid. Inside lay folders, envelopes, and a bundle of yellowed letters tied with navy ribbon. Everything was perfectly preserved in airtight sleeves. The scent of old paper and cedar wafted up, instantly pulling her backward in time. She reached for the deed first. Joint ownership, Eleanor May Hartley and Thomas James Hartley, filed 2001. She stared at the signature, her own handwriting steady, bold. Below it, her late husband's slanted cursive. The paper crackled as she lifted it, tracing the embossed seal near the corner. They think I'm a guest, she thought, but I never left. I just stopped speaking. The next folder was thicker. Contracts, bank statements, notarized documents. She laid them out methodically on her desk, sorting them by year. And then, tucked between two folders, she found the letters. The ribbon slid off like it had waited years to be free. The first envelope was addressed in her husband's hand. In case I'm not there when you need reminding. Her breath caught. She opened it slowly, carefully, as if it might crumble. His voice bloomed in her head with every line. You made this house a home, Ellie. Not me, not Daniel. You. You picked the doors, the tile, the trees we planted together. You paid the lion's share because you believed in legacy. If they ever forget, remind them. If they ever try to take it, don't let them. This isn't just walls. This is your worth. Guard it. Please. She pressed the letter to her chest. For a long moment she sat frozen in her chair, the hum of the dryer the only sound in the house. Then she heard heels clicking down the hallway. A knock. Caroline didn't wait before cracking the door. You left this in the foyer, she said, holding up the packing invoice like it was radioactive. Eleanor stood slowly and took it. Thank you. Caroline's eyes flicked to the open crate, the documents, the letters. You really shouldn't keep so much paper, she muttered. That stuff's a fire hazard. Eleanor smiled faintly. Some things are meant to burn if they're ever disrespected. Caroline paused, then scoffed, turned, and left. Eleanor returned to her desk and stacked the paperwork neatly into a file folder. She slipped it into her drawer, locked it, and exhaled. Across town, a clerk at the county records office typed a name into the system. His brows furrowed. He clicked again. The ownership log hadn't been updated in over 20 years. He filled out the form, printed a single-page document, slid it into a government-stamped envelope, and dropped it in the outgoing tray. 2 days later, Daniel opened the mailbox and froze. Among the catalogs and credit card bills was an envelope from the county title division. He tore it open. Notice of title review. Property 1449 Red Cedar Lane. The ink bled slightly from the humidity, but the message was clear. An inquiry had been filed, and his name wasn't the only one on record anymore. The louder they laughed, the closer I got. The hallway was too quiet. Eleanor stepped out of her room, only to find Daniel waiting in the kitchen, arms folded, a thin sheet of paper clutched in his hand like it might catch fire. His knuckles were white. The coffee machine hummed behind him, a bitter scent rising from a half-filled mug left untouched on the counter. You want to explain this? He asked, waving the envelope from the county title division. She blinked slowly, walked past him toward the sink, and poured herself a glass of water. The clink of the glass against the marble was the only sound between them for a moment. I assume it's self-explanatory, she said softly, not looking at him. It says there's been a legal inquiry into the property. This property. The house we live in. Caroline and I. Eleanor took a sip. Calm, deliberate. Yes, it does. Daniel let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Is this one of your senior moments? Did you fill out something wrong? Before she could answer, Caroline breezed in, dressed in silk pajamas and a loose robe that screamed effortless money. She gave Eleanor a withering once-over, then snatched the paper from Daniel. "Oh God, this again?" she scoffed. "Honestly, Daniel, your mother's sweet, but she's getting confused. Paperwork, finances, it's too much at her age. We've talked about this." "I'm standing right here," Eleanor said, voice steady. Caroline smiled, unbothered. "Exactly. That's why I'm keeping it simple. You're confused, Eleanor. And this letter? It's just a glitch." Eleanor offered a faint smile. "Then it should be easy to fix." Caroline laughed. "Of course. Maybe it's time we looked into a senior community for you. Someplace peaceful with daily activities. A nice little kitchenette, like a cruise, but on land." Daniel nodded absently, as if the idea had been floating in his head already. Eleanor set her glass down. Her hand trembled, but only slightly. She turned back to them and nodded slowly. "You're probably right," she said. "I'll look into it." Caroline blinked. "Wait, really?" Eleanor forced a weary smile. "If I'm making mistakes, maybe I do need help." Daniel gave her a half hug, the kind reserved for casual acquaintances. "That's good, Mom. You're being practical." But they didn't see the glint in her eye as she turned away. They never did. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and pine polish. Eleanor sat in a high-backed chair, spine straight, documents spread neatly in front of her. Mr. Herrera, her attorney, looked over the old deeds with reverence. "I can't believe they never finalized this," he said, tapping the line that still bore her name. "They just moved in and assumed it was theirs?" Eleanor nodded, her tone even. "After Thomas passed, I didn't correct them. I was tired. I thought, let them feel important. And now? Now I feel something else." He smiled. "The law is on your side. We can reinstate the full title today. You'll be the sole legal owner." She signed the updated documents with a pen that weighed more than it looked. Herrera leaned forward. "Would you like to transfer any additional funds, set up protection clauses?" She handed him a secondary slip of paper. A bank account. Her own. Quietly built, never shared. "Move this into the estate name and set a new access protocol." He whistled under his breath. "That's a generous amount." "I prefer to be underestimated," she said. That night, while Daniel watched TV and Caroline gave herself an LED facial in their spa bathroom, Eleanor sat at her modest desk. The folder now had a new label, sole title holder, active. She ran her fingers across the seal, then closed the folder, locking it with a quiet click. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply sat still, surrounded by the silence of someone who had already won. Downstairs, Caroline opened the mail and paused. A heavy envelope sat at the bottom of the pile. No return address, thick cardstock. She tore it open. Inside was a single line, embossed in black. "Property title transfer, effective immediately." She read it twice, 3 times. Then screamed. "They didn't want me at the table, so I set my own." The smell of grilled rosemary lamb and expensive perfume floated through the summer air like a taunt. Lights draped across the backyard glowed soft gold against dusk, and waiters in black vests weaved through garden chairs topped with velvet cushions. Eleanor stood by her bedroom window upstairs, watching guests stream through the side gate. Red heels clicked against stone, voices bubbled with laughter, and champagne popped like applause. She wasn't on the guest list. She didn't need to be. She already owned the venue. Her gaze moved to Caroline, center of attention in a backless crimson gown, laughing too loud at something her friend whispered. Daniel followed behind her with 2 wine glasses and the sort of slack-jawed devotion Eleanor hadn't seen since his college days. It was Caroline's birthday, and apparently the party didn't call for help. Eleanor took her time dressing. A deep green silk blouse, pearl studs, a red wine lip tint she hadn't worn in years. Her hair, still thick and silver, was brushed into soft waves. She wasn't hiding tonight. She poured herself a glass of Cabernet, steady hands betraying none of the storm she carried. With a final glance in the mirror, she slipped through the side door and out into the backyard like a ghost, finally stepping into its own house. No one noticed her at first. She didn't walk toward them. She strolled along the garden path she once planted with her late husband, lilies still blooming. She stopped beside the water fountain, sipped her wine, and let the murmurs wrap around her like fog. Wait, isn't that Daniel's mom? Didn't she move into assisted living? No, I think she helps around the house now. Eleanor turned her head slowly, just enough to catch Caroline whispering to her circle of friends. She's harmless, Caroline said, voice dripping sugar. Thinks this is her house. Let her have her wine moment. The group chuckled. Eleanor raised her glass in a mock toast. Their laughter quieted for a second. One woman even looked ashamed. Caroline rolled her eyes and looked away. That was enough. Eleanor stepped back from the crowd and, without a word, took out her phone. She angled the lens toward them, recording. Not just their faces, but their words. She caught Caroline saying, "I told Daniel we needed a gate code. Anyone can wander in now." More laughter. "She's like a house cat. Too old to shoo away, too sad to pet." The phone stayed steady in Eleanor's hand, her thumb barely moving over the screen. Her expression never changed. She didn't need revenge. She just needed receipts. She stood by the kitchen side entrance, sipping slowly, watching the party swirl without her. She could hear them speculating about her mental state, her finances, her silence, every word carved deeper into the record. And yet she smiled. A small, knowing smile, because the house wasn't just hers legally, it was hers in every brick and root and signature. They could paint it, party in it, parade through it in red gowns and wine-fueled lies, but beneath all of that, she was the foundation. Inside, she uploaded the video to a new email account. No name, no trace. Just one recipient, Caroline's boss. Subject line, "Your senior leadership team after hours." She added no message, just the video file, hit send, closed the laptop. As she rinsed her glass in the sink, her phone buzzed with a single line from an unknown number. "Who filmed this?" Eleanor set the glass down, wiped her hands, and turned off the light. Tomorrow would answer that question. Sometimes silence delivers the loudest shock. Caroline's stilettos echoed. Down the gleaming marble floors of the corporate hallway, sharp, frantic clicks chasing after her dignity. Her phone buzzed for the fourth time that morning. This time it wasn't from Daniel. It was from Lynette Kim, her direct boss. "Meet me in my office. Now no emojis, no punctuation, just cold command." Inside the glass-walled conference room, Lynette had her arms folded and a tablet in hand. The screen was paused on a frozen video frame. Caroline mid-eye roll, mid-laugh, wine glass aloft. The words from the night before drifted out from the speakers. "She's harmless. Thinks this is her house. Like a house cat. Too old to shoo away, too sad to pet." Caroline's smile faltered. Her throat dried. "Where did you—" "We received it anonymously," Lynette said, cool as steel. "But HR ran a voice match. It's you. This isn't just tasteless, it's classist, cruel. Your promotion is off the table, indefinitely." Caroline's hand trembled as she tried to respond, but Lynette didn't wait. "You'll stay on probationary status for the next quarter. Be very careful how you speak, on and off the clock." Back home, the scent of lavender filled the upstairs guest bathroom. A fresh bouquet of lilacs sat in a tall, crystal vase on the windowsill, cut from Eleanor's own garden, still thriving after all these years. Beneath it, folded into a towel cabinet drawer, lay a cream folder. Not sealed, not hidden. It read, simply, Deed. 2001, original copy. The sun hit the vase at an angle that lit the petals like stained glass. Caroline entered, still fuming from the office reprimand, and paused. Her gaze fell to the folder. She opened it on instinct. There it was, her mother-in-law's name, alone on the title. No Daniel, no joint ownership, just Eleanor Grace Lark. Downstairs, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, sipping mint tea and reading a hardback novel. When Caroline stomped in, lips tight, cheeks flushed, Eleanor didn't look up. You set me up, Caroline hissed. You sent that video. Eleanor gently turned a page. I sent flowers. The rest sent itself. The silence stretched. Caroline blinked, then turned, heels clacking out of the kitchen like a drum roll retreating from defeat. That evening, Daniel returned from work early. Eleanor's door was open. He walked in without knocking. He didn't bother with pretense. He slammed the deed on her desk. Why are there property inquiries in your name? His voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Eleanor looked up from her paperwork, unfazed. She removed her glasses and set them down beside a stack of legal documents. Because it's mine, she said simply. You're not in your right mind. This house, it was a gift. You signed it over. No, Daniel. You said I did. But the transfer was never filed. The papers were never signed. You were too busy moving in your new bride to double-check. Her tone never rose. It sliced softer than a whisper. You're trying to make us homeless? I'm reminding you where you're standing, Eleanor said, rising slowly. You forgot. Daniel's hands balled into fists. He stepped back, eyes scanning the room. The certificates, the file folders, the calm. It was real. Everything he'd dismissed for months was real. Why now? He asked, voice suddenly quiet. Why are you doing this now? Eleanor walked past him to the door, placing her hand on the frame. Then she turned to face him, eyes steady and unshakable. Because you gave me a room smaller than the closet I once built for you. Because your wife calls me the help, and your silence echoes louder than her insults. Because I spent a decade fading in this house, and I finally remembered. I built it. She leaned closer. And Daniel? He held his breath. She whispered the words like a final signature. Start looking for a lease? Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, watching her walk away when the doorbell rang. On the welcome mat sat a bright yellow envelope, stamped Court Notice, Property Rental Compliance Audit in bold red letters. They mocked me as the maid. I returned as the landlord. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, weighted like consequence. Eleanor slid it across the dining table toward Daniel and Caroline as they sat with their morning coffee, Caroline with her oat milk latte, Daniel mid-scroll on his phone. Daniel didn't even glance up. What's this? He muttered. Caroline, always quicker to read tension, narrowed her eyes. She picked up the envelope and peeled it open. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled by the time she reached the second page. Her jaw dropped. This is a lease agreement? Eleanor stood on the other side of the table, serene in a charcoal gray cardigan, the morning light softening her silver curls. Correct, she said. Effective immediately. Rent is due on the 1st of next month. You'll find the rates, late fees, and payment portal listed in detail. Daniel finally looked up. You've got to be kidding. I'm not, Eleanor replied, sliding a second sheet toward him. Market. Valuation breakdown. Property taxes. Utilities, repairs, the works. Caroline's voice turned sharp. You can't do this. We live here. No, Eleanor said calmly. You've occupied here. You never paid $1, never signed ownership papers, never contributed to maintenance. Legally, you're long-term guests, squatting, technically. I'm offering you something better. A lease. You've lost your mind, Daniel said, standing up abruptly. No, Eleanor said, her tone still eerily measured. I've finally found it. Later that week, Eleanor posted the new rules on the refrigerator in precise bullet points. No overnight guests without approval. Shared kitchen use ends at 9 p.m. Rent due monthly via secure deposit. Personal suite construction begins next Monday. Caroline snatched the paper down, scoffing. This is absurd. Eleanor didn't respond. Instead, she met with contractors to discuss the renovation, partitioning off the west wing of the house, converting it into a fully self-contained suite with a separate entrance. Privacy, independence, power. You're serious about this? The contractor had asked, studying her blueprint. Deadly. Caroline's world shrank quickly. Her spa membership, canceled. Hair appointments, stretched out. New handbags? Out of the question. Daniel tried reasoning once more, cornering Eleanor by the staircase as she carried fresh-cut peonies from the garden. You raised me here, he said. Isn't this still home? Eleanor paused, Home is earned, Daniel, not assumed. You're going to charge us rent? I'm giving you a choice, she said. You can pay to stay, or leave with dignity. Caroline, listening from the top of the stairs, nearly dropped her phone. By midweek, Eleanor's private suite was taking shape. New flooring, a separate lock on the interior door. She even had a separate mailbox installed. The house buzzed with drills and soft jazz from the contractor's speakers. It felt alive again. She hung wind chimes near her suite's window, the delicate tinkling becoming her lullaby. Caroline sulked in her glam room, now stripped of fresh flowers, makeup orders, and housekeeper touches. I used to feel like a queen in this house, she muttered. Daniel muttered back, that's because you thought you owned the castle. That Friday, Eleanor received a knock at her private entrance. It was the mail carrier holding a manila envelope with bold red text. Court notice, emergency tenant injunction filed. She opened it on her garden bench, the wind tugging at the edges of the papers. Daniel had filed an emergency motion, claiming undue hardship, elder confusion, and coercion. Eleanor chuckled softly. No panic, no fear, just quiet resolve. She walked inside and pulled a file from her drawer, dated bank transfers, recorded conversations, notarized property agreements, all stacked like bricks in the fortress of her truth. That night, as the sun dipped low and the chimes whispered, Eleanor lit a single candle beside her window. In the reflection of the glass, her own calm face stared back, but her eyes drifted to the lawn. There, in the shadows, stood Caroline, phone in hand, taking pictures of the contractor's work like a woman preparing for war. He expected me to fold. I showed up in a tailored suit. Eleanor's heels echoed sharply against the marble floor of the county courthouse. Each step was deliberate, measured, not rushed, not tentative, just certain. She wore navy, not the powder blue cardigan they'd always seen her in, but a sharply cut suit with brass buttons and a soft silk scarf tied at her throat. Her silver hair was neatly swept back into a low chignon. There was no room for fragility today, no cracks, no apologies. Daniel was already inside the courtroom, slouched in the front row next to Caroline, who was typing furiously on her phone, barely masking her anxiety. He glanced toward the door as it opened, and froze. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence that followed her in did all the talking. Judge Ramirez raised an eyebrow as the hearing began. Mrs. Harper, you're the respondent in this emergency injunction? Yes, Your Honor, Eleanor replied calmly. Daniel's attorney, a young man in a slightly too shiny suit, cleared his throat. We believe Mrs. Harper is being manipulated. There are concerns about mental fitness and a pattern of emotional instability. The judge tilted his head. Do you have any documented evaluations? No, Your Honor, but... Then let's move to property documentation. Eleanor opened her briefcase with gloved hands and took out a thick folder. She didn't hand it to her lawyer. She walked it directly to the bailiff. Inside, the original deed signed in 2001. Mortgage payment receipts under her name. Property taxes paid for 2 decades, bank transfers, letters from her late husband, and a notarized title update from 3 weeks prior. The courtroom grew quieter with every turn of the page. Caroline leaned toward Daniel and hissed, "You told me it was yours. You told me she signed it away." Daniel's face turned red, not from rage, but realization. He wasn't fighting a confused old woman. He was fighting history. And history came with paperwork. The judge flipped through the documents for a moment more, then leaned back. Well, Mr. Harper, it seems your mother is not only mentally competent, she is legally bulletproof. Injunction is denied. Daniel stood up. But she's evicting us. We have nowhere to go. That's a civil matter, Judge Ramirez said flatly, and she is within her rights as the sole property owner. You may seek rental protection, but not here. Not today. Gavel. Bang. Case dismissed. Outside the courtroom, as reporters milled about for unrelated cases, Eleanor stepped into the sunlight. She paused at the top of the courthouse steps and slipped on her sunglasses. Caroline rushed after her. You set us up. You knew this would happen. Eleanor turned slowly, then leaned in close, just enough for Caroline to hear her over the wind. Next time, she said, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel, address your landlord. And she walked away. Daniel didn't follow. He stood under the courthouse's stone archway, clutching the injunction papers like they were ashes, already cold, already meaningless. Back home that evening, Eleanor placed the court order into her file cabinet between 2 decades of quietly kept records. The sun was just beginning to set. A soft amber glow bled through the windows, casting long golden streaks across the parquet floor she'd paid for. There was a letter waiting on her desk. She opened it carefully. The envelope was aged, but crisp, formal. From the trustee of John Harper's estate subject, beneficiary funds, final disbursement notification. Eleanor blinked. She hadn't expected anything more, but inside the envelope was a folded document and one single check. She read the line twice to be sure. Matured investment transfer. $914,723.56. Her late husband's signature was faint at the bottom. A final gift, a final shift. Eleanor looked up at the garden outside, already envisioning the lake cottage she'd once dreamed about, and now could finally afford. Turns out dignity wasn't the only thing they stole from me. The paper trembled slightly in Eleanor's hand, though not from shock, more from the electricity of silent vindication. Her late husband's signature stared back at her, nestled at the bottom of a matured investment account summary. Total value, $914,723.56. The figure blurred momentarily as her breath caught. All these years, all those dinner scraps, those insults, the looks of pity, and all this time, she'd been sitting on a fortune they never knew existed. She pressed her palm to the check like a prayer, then folded the letter slowly and slid it into her desk drawer, not under lock and key, just resting, like truth, waiting for its moment. The next morning, Eleanor walked into a small real estate office in town, her posture perfectly poised, a quiet storm beneath the surface. "I'd like to put in a cash offer," she said to the stunned agent, gesturing to the listing on the desk. A lakeside cottage, 2 bedrooms, full deck, and a private garden, serene and elegant, just like she imagined. "Name on the deed?" the agent asked politely. Eleanor smiled. "Mine." The property manager, a gentle-spoken woman named Karen, walked the cottage with her the following week. The floorboards creaked with charm. A single robin flitted past the window as they stood in the sunroom, dust dancing in the light. "I want it renovated, not remodeled," Eleanor said. "Keep its soul, just bring it to life again." Karen nodded. "Timeline?" "Quiet urgency," Eleanor replied. "But no rush. It's waited this long for me, I can wait a little for it." Back at the main house, Eleanor began packing slowly. Not suitcases, boxes. Little by little, she emptied her closet. Her journals, her books, her shawls, all moved discreetly into storage. The attic was filled with memories, so were the lies. She would leave the facade behind. But the bones of the house, those were hers. Soon they wouldn't be. Daniel and Caroline didn't notice. They were too busy arguing about spa bills and landscaping costs. Eleanor's lease enforcement had cut into their comfort like a dull knife. There were no more impulsive upgrades, no more designer brunches, and now, no more control. Eleanor had already made arrangements with a reputable rental firm. The house would be listed as a high-end long-term rental in less than a month. "Quiet tenants only," she'd said. "Preferably no family." One night, she was returning from the cottage, her coat still scented faintly with pinewood varnish, when she found Caroline in her room. The guest room door was open. The top drawer of her dresser had been jimmied, her documents scattered like someone had tried to be careful but lost patience. And there was Caroline, kneeling near the second drawer, her fingers curled around a bank. Statement. "What exactly are you looking for?" Eleanor's voice, calm, cut through the air like a knife through glass. Caroline jumped up, startled but trying to collect herself. "Oh, I thought this was the linen closet," she stammered, holding the paper like a child caught stealing. "The linen closet doesn't contain tax records," Eleanor said softly, walking into the room, eyes locked on the woman who'd once stolen her title, her name, her dignity. "What did you take?" she asked. Caroline's eyes flicked toward the drawer again. Too late. Eleanor calmly walked past her, knelt, and opened it fully. She pulled out a manila folder, one that hadn't been there last week. Inside, printed statements, bank account transfers. Caroline's name. But so was Daniel's. Eleanor's heart didn't race. It hardened. The numbers told the story. For over a year, Caroline had been funneling money from Daniel's shared business account into a personal offshore card under her maiden name. Quiet theft in the house of a woman she once called the Help. She stood slowly and looked Caroline in the eye. "I'd advise you to return that card to your husband," she said, voice low, "while he's still your husband." Caroline didn't respond. But that night, Eleanor heard a muffled argument from the master bedroom, the walls thin enough to carry Caroline's breaking sobs. In the morning, Daniel's car was gone. So was the card. But Eleanor? She was finally present in her own life. "They laughed when I said rent. They're not laughing now." The envelope lay on the kitchen island like a quiet explosion waiting to happen. Cream paper, elegant black ink. No dramatic stamping, no lawyer's insignia. Just a typed header. Final notice. Lease termination. 30 days. Eleanor didn't need to announce it. She simply placed it beside the fruit bowl, straightened her shoulders, and poured herself a cup of chamomile tea. The shriek that followed wasn't even surprising. "You're evicting us?" Caroline's voice cracked from upstairs, echoing down like a siren. Heavy footsteps thundered across the hardwood floor, and within seconds she appeared. Barefoot, mascara smudged, fury in every breath. Daniel followed her slower. Less rage, more disbelief. His tie was crooked. He looked like he hadn't slept. "This is a joke, right?" he asked, holding the letter up like it might transform in his hands. "You're not seriously doing this, Mom." Eleanor sipped her tea. "I told you this was coming," she said calmly. "I gave you 60 days. Now there's 30 left. You can't just kick us out?" Caroline spat. "This is our home." "Correction," Eleanor said, her voice steady but icy. "It was never legally transferred. I let you play house in it, but the lease ends in 30 days, unless you'd like to renegotiate terms." Caroline blinked. "What terms?" Daniel asked, cautious. Eleanor reached into her folder and slid across a second envelope. "This," she said, "is the listing agreement for my lakeside property. It's clean, renovated, and available for immediate rental." Daniel opened it slowly. A printed sheet outlined the amenities: hardwood floors, garden views, private dock. Below it, the rent. $6,300 per month. "You want us to rent from you?" Caroline laughed, sharp and bitter. "That place? At that price?" "You're free to look elsewhere," Eleanor said. "But the timeline remains." Caroline crumpled the paper and hurled it at the floor. "You're evil." "No," Eleanor said softly. "I was accommodating." For years, Daniel sank onto the stool, shoulders slumping under the weight of entitlement meeting consequence. "Can we just figure something out?" he asked. "There has to be a middle ground." "There was," Eleanor replied. "You paved over it." The next morning, the moving trucks arrived. It wasn't for Daniel or Caroline. It was for Eleanor. She supervised with quiet dignity, instructing the men where to load her boxes, which ones went into storage, which would go to the cottage, her antique desk, her garden tools, her books. Caroline hovered in the doorway, arms folded like a fortress. "You're really doing this?" she asked. Eleanor didn't look up. "You still think I'm bluffing?" "I think you've lost your mind. I think I finally found it." Daniel lingered near the foyer, holding a mug like it might shield him from the unraveling. "Do you really hate us this much?" Eleanor paused, turned. "I don't hate you," she said. "I stopped waiting for you to see me." At dusk, the sun dipped low, casting long golden streaks across the front yard. The air was still, heavy with unspoken things. Boxes now filled Eleanor's car trunk. Movers were wrapping the last of her patio furniture. A faint breeze carried the scent of lavender from the garden. Carolyn stormed out the front door, eyes wild. "You ruined everything!" she shouted. "You turned our lives upside down for what? Some power trip? Some grudge? Eleanor didn't flinch. No, she said softly, stepping into her car. I remembered everything. As Eleanor drove off, her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message blinked onto the screen. Voicemail from Attorney Hastings. Urgent. You'll want to hear this. They never noticed me leave, but they heard when I arrived. The first sound that filled the lakeside cottage that afternoon wasn't laughter. It was music, soft jazz flowing from a vintage record player Eleanor had pulled from storage. She adjusted the volume with a touch of reverence, as if tuning a radio not to sound, but to memory. Outside, fairy lights dangled from the cedar beams of the wraparound porch, swaying gently in the early autumn breeze. The lake shimmered under the slanted golden sun. Champagne bottles rested in ice buckets on a reclaimed wood table. For the first time in years, the air around Eleanor felt hers. The doorbell rang, though it didn't need to. Her guests had already spotted the wine glasses and followed the smell of lemon-thyme chicken straight through the open gate. "Eleanor!" cried Margaret, her late husband's sister, embracing her with the warmth of someone who knew both the old and new her. "This place is divine. You look radiant." Eleanor smiled, brushing invisible lint from her cream linen dress. "You're too kind. I just finally have enough air to breathe." Soon the garden filled with soft chatter and bursts of laughter. Old colleagues from the library, friends from the charity board, even the florist who'd once whispered kind words to Eleanor when she'd picked out sympathy lilies the week of her husband's passing, all were there. Everyone who mattered. Carolyn and Daniel hadn't even asked where she was going. They only noticed the loss when the house emptied of its warmth. Now, Eleanor raised her glass. "To beginnings," she said. "The kind we were once too tired to dream." Applause rippled through the group. Glasses clinked. Margaret squeezed Eleanor's arm. "You've reclaimed more than a house, you know. You've reclaimed you." As the guests mingled, Eleanor wandered to the sunroom. Her easel stood by the window, canvas still wet with brush strokes, an abstract landscape in hues of deep blue and defiant gold. "You paint?" her neighbor asked, peering over curiously. "I used to," Eleanor replied. "Then I started again. Quietly. Like forgiving yourself." The neighbor smiled. This looks like liberation?" "It is." The conversation drifted to food, then art, then travel. That was when Nora, the florist's teenage daughter, slipped in through the patio door holding her phone with both hands. Mrs. Halloway?" she said, cautious. "You might want to see this." Eleanor took the phone. A video played on loop. It was Caroline. In a dim room. Mascara streaked. Voice strained but unmistakable. "She tricked us. Manipulated us. I cared for her. I included her. And now she's..." "What? Making herself look like a victim online?" "It's elder abuse in reverse." The video was time-stamped yesterday and already had over 38,000 views. Eleanor handed the phone back without blinking. "Some people speak loudest when they feel smallest," she murmured. Margaret, watching from nearby, narrowed her eyes. "She's spiraling." "No," Eleanor corrected gently, sipping her rosé. "She's revealing." Just as dusk deepened and the last guests began saying goodbye, Eleanor's doorbell rang again. A courier stood with a crisp manila envelope. "Miss Eleanor Halloway?" "Yes?" "Legal correspondence. Sign here." She scrawled her name and stepped back inside, heart rate still even. She peeled open the envelope. Legal notice. Allegations of coercion and elder manipulation, filed by Daniel Halloway. She sat on her reading chair, legs crossed, silent. Then she chuckled, once, dryly. "Of course." She reached for her phone and texted her lawyer, "Let's make this public. I've got nothing left to hide. If you push a lie long enough, it eventually snaps." The summons arrived folded neatly inside a plain envelope, just like truth often hides inside paper-thin lies. Eleanor stood in her sunlit kitchen, fingers brushing the parchment edge, lips barely parting as she read Daniel's accusation. Elder coercion, psychological manipulation, undue influence. He claimed she'd preyed on his grief, that she'd tricked him while he was emotionally vulnerable after his father's passing. that her reclaiming of the house was part of a long con. Her thumb paused over the last line. Plaintiff seeks full control of property and financial restitution for damages. She exhaled slowly, folded the letter in half, and set it beside the fresh roses on her marble counter. The aroma of the peach tart in the oven drifted into the room, warm, defiant. "Let him lie," she said quietly, "but he'll have to do it under oath." 3 weeks later, Eleanor walked into the courtroom in a storm gray suit tailored just for her. Her heels clicked with purpose. Her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patrice, walked beside her like a shadow with teeth. Daniel sat on the opposite bench, unshaven, eyes tired, Caroline whispering furiously in his ear. He glanced up only once. Eleanor met his eyes and did not blink. "Eleanor Holloway's team. Present?" the clerk called. "Yes," Patrice said, rising like a sword unsheathed. The judge reviewed the files. "Let's proceed." It took exactly 16 minutes for Daniel's version of the story to begin unraveling. Patrice introduced signed documents dated 2 years prior, proof that Eleanor's financial involvement in the home had never ceased. They included her bank transfers, co-ownership contracts, even notarized letters Daniel himself had signed acknowledging her share. Then came the kicker, a journal entry from Eleanor's late husband, submitted as evidence, dated 8 years ago. It detailed the house purchase, Eleanor's contributions, and the intent for her to retain ownership no matter what. By the 30-minute mark, the judge was done. "This court finds the claims baseless and dismisses them in full." Daniel's face didn't flush, it drained. Completely. Caroline stared at her hands. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. Outside, reporters swarmed the exit. One held up a phone with Caroline's viral video still playing. "Miss Holloway, did you see what she posted about you?" Eleanor turned her face toward the camera, unbothered. "I prefer facts over fiction, and courtrooms over comment sections." That clip, too, would go viral. Within 48 hours, Caroline's employer issued a public statement condemning her remarks. Her promotion was rescinded. By Friday, she was fired, cited for ethical incompatibility. By Monday, a photo of Daniel and Caroline unloading boxes into a modest second-floor rental was circulating on neighborhood pages. No backyard, no walk-in closets, just the muffled sound of downstairs neighbors and their yappy terrier. Meanwhile, Eleanor's lake shimmered like glass. That Friday night, alone in her study, Eleanor opened a dusty filing cabinet. She was searching for a copy of a floor plan when she stumbled across an envelope marked Private, 2011. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a signature page, a mortgage adjustment document Daniel had submitted after his father's death. Her name was on it, but it wasn't her handwriting. She examined the loops of the E, the sharp Y in Holloway. Forged, sloppy, but just passable enough. Her pulse didn't race, her jaw didn't clench. She just stared. She had let it go once, to protect him, to protect what little family she still had. But now she folded the paper slowly and slid it into a new folder, labeled Choice. Eleanor whispered to herself as she locked the drawer. Mercy is a decision, not a habit. Forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just closing the door. The pen hovered in her hand longer than it should have. The letter was only 1 page, maybe 200 words, but it carried 30 years. Eleanor sat at the edge of her writing desk, eyes fixed on the soft vellum sheet before her. Outside, rain whispered against the windows like a confession long overdue. She didn't begin with Dear Daniel. She began with silence, and then, finally, I forgive you, but not for your sake, for mine. The ink flowed slowly, and with each curve of her script, the weight behind her shoulders loosened. She wrote of nights she spent folding laundry that wasn't hers, of dinners she cooked while never being offered a seat, of birthdays spent watching, never celebrated, of her silence, a kindness mistaken for servitude. I watched you grow into a man I could barely recognize, and still, I held on to the hope that you'd remember the woman who taught you how to tie your shoes, not just the one who washed them later." A teardrop darkened a corner of the page. She didn't wipe it. She wrote about her husband, his final words, his trust in her judgment, about how she honored his wish, not by protecting the house, but by protecting what it represented: dignity, legacy. Her name on a deed was never about money. It was about not disappearing. "I'm no longer interested in fixing what you broke in me. That was never my job." By the time she signed her name, her hand no longer trembled. The rain had stopped. A quiet stillness wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. She folded the letter with care, placed it in a plain envelope, and sealed it with one firm press. Then she slipped on her coat, tied the buttons up to her chin, and walked into the crisp air with the envelope in hand. The drive took 8 minutes. The street was darker than she remembered, maybe because the porch lights were off. She didn't knock. She simply walked up the steps of her former house, the place that had buried her beneath throw pillows and errands, and laid the envelope gently at the front door, right where Caroline's welcome mat used to say, "Bless this mess." Then, with her breath forming soft clouds in the cold, she turned and walked away. Back home, Eleanor poured herself a cup of green tea, wrapped her shawl tighter, and opened her laptop. A blinking cursor waited patiently at the top of a blank document labeled "Inheritance, a Story of Becoming Seen." She typed, "There is no sound louder than being ignored. This is my response." Word by word, she began to trace the shape of her life, not through their betrayal, but through her survival, through her grace, her grit, her decision to be the architect of her final chapters. She didn't write to shame them. She wrote to resurrect herself. The fire crackled nearby. The wind shifted outside. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Susan or Patrice, but it was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then picked up. "Is this Eleanor Holloway?" the woman on the line asked, her voice clipped, professional. "Yes? This is Harper Lenz from Silverline Publishing. One of our editors came across your public excerpt. We're very interested in discussing a possible adaptation, memoir or screenwrites." Eleanor blinked. "I haven't submitted anything." "We saw the draft online. You must have left your autosave settings on. The words, they don't just speak. They roar." Eleanor looked at the blinking cursor again. This time it blinked back like a spotlight. "They called me the maid. Now they call me ma'am," from across the gate. The headline caught her eye while she sipped her morning coffee on the sun-drenched patio. "Former housekeeper turned author breaks sales records with memoir on class and silence." She nearly laughed. Housekeeper? That's what they called her when they didn't know her name. Now they knew it, and they spelled it right. Eleanor Holloway. A soft wind swept through her garden, sending lavender stalks swaying and carrying the scent of earth and eucalyptus. The hummingbirds flirted with her freshly bloomed jasmine, and she watched them as if they too were old friends paying their respects. The lakeside cottage had once been a vision taped to the inside of her desk drawer. Now it was reality, built with money they never thought she had, standing on land they believed she didn't deserve. The morning was warm, but she wore her shawl anyway. It had become something of a cape. The local bookstore was nearly sold out. She didn't need to go in to know. A former co-worker from the city had sent a photo, 5 copies of Inheritance, a Story of Becoming Seen, on the staff picks table, each with a handwritten sticky note that read, "This book whispered before it roared." Eleanor didn't crave the attention, but she didn't fear it anymore either. She had donated $50,000 from her first royalty check to a shelter for displaced domestic workers. She signed the check in the garden, hand steady, heart full. The press had called her reclusive. They didn't know how loud peace could be. Susan dropped by later that afternoon, holding 2 flutes of champagne and an envelope. "It's official," she grinned. "You outsold 3 local politicians and 1 reality TV chef." Eleanor chuckled. "Tell me we're not going to celebrate with cheap champagne again." Susan winked. "It's not the bottle that matters. It's the company." They toasted beneath the pergola. The wind teased the edge of Eleanor's robe, and she didn't bother taming it. The only message Daniel ever sent had been 3 sentences long. I read the book. I understand now. I'm sorry. She never replied. Forgiveness didn't always require dialogue. Sometimes it just required distance. Caroline, someone whispered, was now folding sweaters at a department store. The same woman who once corrected Eleanor's salad dressing choices had spent 2 shifts in the returns line. Poetic? Yes, but not Eleanor's concern. She had moved on, moved through. That afternoon she walked slowly through her garden, fingertips grazing the rosemary bushes, toes bare against warm flagstone. A ladybug landed on her wrist and stayed longer than expected. She smiled and let it. The scent of jasmine was stronger now, sun-soaked and almost sweet enough to taste. A small breeze wrapped around her as if to say, "Yes, this is yours." And in that moment, she heard a voice, young, male, unsure, call from beyond the front gate. "Excuse me, ma'am?" She turned, not startled. A delivery boy stood nervously with a padded envelope in hand, eyes wide with recognition. "You're her, right? The book?" he stammered. She nodded gently. "I am." He handed her the package with both hands, like it held more than paper. "My mom loved it, said you wrote everything she was too tired to say." Eleanor paused, absorbing that. "Tell your mother I heard her." The boy left. The gate clanged shut. She returned to her bench beneath the old olive tree and opened the package. Inside, a letter from a national distributor. They wanted a second print run, twice as many copies. Potential for a documentary, options for a scripted series. She placed the letter beside her, took another sip of her tea, let the sunlight soak her face like grace. "I wasn't their maid. I was their foundation. And now, I finally stand on mine."